Husband unsuspectingly takes photo of wife. They turn pale when they look closer at the picture. This woman was on vacation with her husband when something scared the living daylight out of them. They were sipping their morning coffee when her husband decided to snap a picture of his beautiful wife. But that photo captured more than they bargained for. It also captured this man, and seeing him made them turn pale. That morning started so normal. It was just a perfect day where nothing could go wrong. But boy, were they mistaken. Ben and his wife, Carol, sat at a local pub drinking a coffee in the morning sun. Ben thought his wife looked particularly pretty this morning and wanted to act on it. So, without deliberating with his wife, Ben took out his camera and decided to take a picture of her. Honey, you look so pretty in that morning glow, Ben said, giggling. She was initially annoyed but wanted to make memories, so she allowed the picture. But immediately after, both of their smiles would disappear. The clicking sound of the camera did its thing, indicating that the photo was made. Let's see what we've got. Ben said confidently. He lowered the device and peeked at the screen in the center of it. But what he saw then changed his happy smile into a pale face of horror. Ben's body was shivering as he held the camera in his shaky hands. Carol was still smiling until that point, wondering how bad she looked in the image. But as she gazed upon her husband, she saw the change in his complexion. "What's wrong, babe?" she asked with concerned eyes. Carol tried to get the attention of her husband after not responding to her initial question. She tapped on the table, asking again what was wrong, but Ben just looked at the camera screen and mumbled, "I can't believe it. After all these years," was heard softly as he then looked around in panic. Ben fell quiet and pushed the photo camera across the table to his confused wife. He did not explain what he saw, leaving her to figure out her husband's thoughts herself. But what she then saw frightened her as well, although it would be for a different reason she would later find out. Ben didn't expect his wife to understand the significance of that picture, so he looked around in panic, scanning his surroundings instead. But when his wife let out a high-pitched yelp, she grabbed his attention instantly. "This is the man from the other city," she said without hesitating. "I've seen him before." The city Ben and Carol were in now was the second and last place of their city trip holiday. Just yesterday, they were at the other end of the state in a small but romantic town 500 miles away. The areas couldn't be more different. Yet one thing in both destinations was the same, making Carol nervous. Carol spoke to her husband, who now had visible tension in his body. She said that at their first city stop, she saw one man constantly during their 2-day stay. "Everywhere I looked, this man was in the background, always creepily staring at us. And it's the same man from this picture," Carol stated. Carol admitted that she found it odd. What were the odds of one person crossing paths with you so many times in a big city? In the end, she thought she might even have been imagining it all. But seeing this picture now made all of it very real. "Is he following us?" Ben's wife asked. This revelation caused even more panic within the couple. Nervousness and confusion build up inside Carol, but her husband's emotions were far more severe than plain old nerves. He was in full-scale panic and looked extremely scared. "Was there something she was missing? What's wrong, Ben? You're frightening me," Carol stated. Without a moment's notice, Ben stood up from the table. He placed some money beneath a coaster to pay for the coffee and then told Carol that they needed to go. Carol was hesitant and looked at her husband in disbelief, but he had no time for delay. Ben grabbed Carol's arm and started walking fast. Carol pulled back a couple of times, but the pull of Ben was just too strong. After a while, it almost felt like her husband was dragging her along, and if not for her watching her feet with every step, it would have been so because Ben's sheer force made her almost fall multiple times. Eventually, they reached a secluded alleyway next to the main road. It was dark and damp, but apparently Ben thought it was an excellent place to lay low. Ben now turned his focus on his wife as he pushed Carol against the wall, begging her to be quiet, and then he asked the following question. Ben looked at Carol with fear in his eyes and asked if she was 100% sure that the man in the picture was the same man she had seen over the last couple of days. Carol nodded in agreement, and that was all Ben needed to hear. "Then we have to run. We're in danger." So after that remark, Ben placed himself next to his wife with his back as flat to the wall as possible. Like, he shimmied over to the edge of the alleyway so you could carefully take a peek at the man road around the corner. And it wasn't long before Ben's heart skipped a beat, because there he was, like, the old man from the picture, and the man whom his wife had already seen multiple times was standing on the main road. He was clearly looking for something or someone, Ben thought. Ben was ready to make another spurt to a different alleyway when Carol intervened and pulled him back. Carol had enough of the mysterious behavior. She yanked her husband's arm and demanded that he explain what the hell was going on. Carol wanted to know who this man was because Ben clearly seemed to know him. And she, most of all, wanted to know why he was this scared of the old guy. Ben let out a long and deep sigh. He grabbed Carol's arm again, this time softly, and asked her to step deeper into the alleyway. We need to get somewhere shrouded so he won't see us. Then I promised to explain everything, Ben said. Carol felt the fear within her husband, so she agreed. The couple walked deeper into the alleyway, hiding their location better. Ben faced his wife and told the story of his troubled past. In my younger years, I did some bad things, and one of them landed me in prison for 5 years. Carol got frustrated after he said that. I know already, so what? After Carol's frustrated interruption in Ben's background story, Carol took over. She said that she knew about his troubled youth, about the fact that he robbed a convenience store in his adolescent years and that he paid for it by doing 5 years in prison. But why does this matter now? She asked. Dean shook his head and said this was true, but it was only part of the story. The other part I've never told you. He said sadly, the fact is that I did not rob that store alone. And what's even worse is that it wasn't just a robbery. Carol saw Ben's eyes tear up. Ben then continued by explaining what actually happened on that fateful day. He explained that he robbed the store with a partner. It was supposed to be a simple grab and go mission. Get the cash and get out. But things went wrong, and it eventually resulted in his partner stabbing the store's clerk. The employee luckily did not die of her injuries, but still the punishment for this crime was severe. They both ended up in prison together and were sentenced to a jail time of 15 years without probation. But how you were out in just 5 years? How is that possible then? Carol asked. Ben wept softly and said that he did a horrible thing in prison, and now it finally caught up with him. In prison, I made a decision that changed both our lives forever. I made a deal with the police and ratted out my partner, who was the one who did the accidental stab. As a consequence of that deal, Ben's prison sentence was shortened. He was a free man after just 5 years served. But the same could not be said about his former partner and friend, because the stabbing now solely fell on him. His stay got extended to 20 years, and that's when a promise was made. Right before Ben was allowed to leave prison, he was contacted by his former partner, who was filled with anger after the deal. And at that moment, he made Ben a promise. After I get out, I will hunt down you and everyone you love and make them pay for your betrayal. As a result of this haunting prediction, Ben moved away from his hometown as far as he could. He moved across the country and settled in a small, quiet town where he eventually met Carol. I've always managed to stay one step ahead of him. But now, 50 years later, he found me. So you see, we have to go. Ben urgently told his wife. Carol was in shock because of the revelation and finally understood the dire situation they were in. Without question, she agreed with Ben's assessment and promised to follow him. Ben scanned the main street again and didn't see his partner anywhere. Go now! The scared couple started running, crossing the street and trying to find a way back to their hotel. They traversed through random side streets, zigzagging their way across town. This tactic was meant to make the stalker lose their trail, or at least make him confused. It seemed to work for a while, but then Ben and Carol almost made it to their hotel. Just one long alleyway to go, and at the end of it was the street that held their sanctuary. But as they entered the narrow cobblestone passage, things went wrong because right at the end of the road, they were cut off abruptly. So at the end of that long, dark alley where hardly made it to the ground, there was an opening, a small passage between two buildings cleared the way toward the main road where their hotel was. But in that opening stood a person. They just saw his silhouette, but he was blocking their path. The couple on the run were stopped in their tracks by this mysterious figure, even though both of them knew who this man was deep inside. They remained motionless. Ben froze in fear, and his wife hid behind his trembling shoulders. The figure stepped toward them and spoke in a low voice. Hi, Ben. Ben recognized the voice instantly and knew that he had nowhere to go. This man had been hunting him down for years, so he wasn't about to let them escape. I finally found you. It took me a while. The approaching man spoke. Ben responded nervously. Well, you did, David. You did. Ben clutched his wife's hand, and by doing so, he confirmed that this was the man they feared so much. This was it, the end of the line. This would be the moment when his former partner, David, executed his revenge. At least that was what they thought, because both were mistaken. David had, by this point, made his way down the alleyway and was standing right in front of the shivering couple. He looked at Ben and started fiddling inside his pants pocket. Ben noticed it too and peered downward multiple times. What was in there? Was he ready to pull out a knife? But what David pulled out of his pocket was something Ben did not expect. He lifted his hand and pointed it toward his old partner. To Ben's surprise, the hand was empty. David made a gesture as if he wanted to shake Ben's hand. This gesture, of course, was mistrusted. Was this a last token before the kill? Ben did not reply by lifting his own hand, and as a response, his former partner chuckled. No trust? Well, that's understandable given our last conversation, but you don't have to worry, the old man said. He promised the couple that he wasn't going to hurt either one of them. You aren't in any danger. Both Ben and Carol were still hesitant to believe his promise, but David said he'd explain. David said that he was angry for a long time. I was angry in prison, and also a long time after my release, I had revenge on my mind, and it consumed my every thought, every fiber of my being. The anger towards you and the conviction dominated my life, and not in a good way. I couldn't sleep and couldn't find a steady job. Something had to give. David followed up by saying that he decided to talk to a therapist, and that decision changed his life for the better. The therapist helped David deal with the anger inside. It cleared out his negative thoughts and made him focus on rebuilding his future. Letting go of that anger was the greatest feeling. It made me whole again and even allowed me to find a loving family. But one thing still bothered me. David said talking to a therapist and speaking to his own wife about his past made him come to terms with what happened, and we realized that he would probably have done the same thing when in Ben's shoes. That's why he abandoned his quest for revenge and started his mission to make amends. But Ben had fled to the other side of the country by that point. He made sure to avoid being found, making it harder for David to get in touch. He spent years trying to find Ben. Eventually, it was a newspaper article about Ben's traveling agency that did the job. Ben owned a traveling agency in the town he now lived in and received an award for best service in the nation. The article about it appeared online, and that's how, purely by chance, David saw his old friend's face again. David didn't hesitate and drove over to the agency to find them. But at that point, your holiday trip had already begun. So with some clever questions toward, your employees, I figured out the locations of your stay. And that's how I followed you here, David explained. The old man followed it up by apologizing for everything, saying he was told for all that anger. David even started crying a little, which caught Ben entirely off guard. His old friend seemed sincere and was now the one waiting nervously for Ben's response. The roles had been reversed, but luckily for David, Ben did not disappoint. He grabbed his friend's hand and pulled him closer, hugging him intensely. The two former pals shared an unexpected moment of friendship. Ben stated that those words were the only thing he ever wanted, and he said he was happy that David had laid down his anger. A massive weight had lifted off both men's shoulders, and the trio spent the rest of the day together. At the end of the day, it was time for David to return home to his family. But before he did, a new promise was made. They promised to bury the past and start fresh. Together, they would rebuild their friendship and look toward the future again, and that they surely did. They had some catching up to do, but now they would have the time to do it because shortly after the holiday, both Ben and David retired. David even moved with his family to the same town as Ben and Carol. They see each other weekly now, and their families also have become close.